The wagon wheel cracked apart beneath her weight, sending Penelope Crawford tumbling into the scorched earth as the last horse screamed and collapsed from exhaustion, foam dripping from its mouth onto the cracked ground of the Colorado plains. She lay there for a moment, tasting blood and dust, watching the buzzards circle overhead like patient undertakers measuring her for a grave she had not yet earned, but could feel approaching with each burning breath. 3 days ago, she had been traveling with a merchant caravan heading toward Denver, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and the crushing weight of everything she had lost. The fever had taken her parents in St. Louis that terrible spring of 1876, one after the other, until she found herself utterly alone at 22 years old with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. An aunt in Denver had written once, years ago, offering refuge if times ever grew desperate. Times had grown desperate indeed. The bandits had come at dawn on the second day. 6 men with faces covered and guns drawn, taking everything of value and killing the wagon master when he reached for his rifle. The others in the caravan had scattered like quail, and Penelope had found herself clinging to the driver's seat of an unmanned wagon as the horses bolted in terror across the plains. She had managed to hold on for hours, desperately trying to remember everything her father had taught her about handling reins, but the animals were mad with fear and thirst, and eventually, the inevitable happened. Now she lay in the middle of nowhere, miles from any settlement she knew, with the sun beating down like a hammer on an anvil. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, brown grass and scattered rocks, with the Rocky Mountains rising like broken teeth on the distant western horizon. She had a canteen, but it had been empty since yesterday. The horse that had fallen would not rise again, and the other had broken free of the traces and disappeared over a rise heading south. Penelope pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, swaying with dizziness. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her sunburned face. Her traveling dress, once a respectable gray cotton, was torn and filthy. She had lost one glove somewhere and her hands were scraped raw. Every part of her body ached with a deep, bone-weary pain that made even breathing feel like too much effort. She looked around, searching for any sign of civilization, any wisp of smoke or distant structure. Nothing. Just the endless rolling prairie and that merciless sun. She could walk, she supposed, but in which direction? The mountains seemed as good a destination as any. There would be water in the mountains if she could reach them. The if seemed very large just now. Penelope bent to retrieve her carpet bag from the wreckage of the wagon. At least she still had that. Inside were 2 changes of undergarments, a spare shirt-waist, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, and a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Not much to show for 22 years of living, but it was all she had left in the world. She started walking west, toward the mountains, because west seemed as good as any direction and better than most. Each step sent jolts of pain through her blistered feet. Her leather boots, made for city streets, were never designed for this kind of punishment. She had walked perhaps a mile when the dizziness grew worse and the horizon started tilting at odd angles. The sun was directly overhead now, brutal and unforgiving. Penelope's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her tongue felt swollen in her mouth. She thought about her mother, who had always been so proper and refined, who had taught her to pour tea and embroider pillowcases and speak French. What use were those skills now? She thought about her father, who had owned a small printing business and had dreams of expanding, of building something lasting. All those dreams had died with him. She stumbled and went down hard, skinning both palms on the rough ground. For a long moment, She just stayed there on her hands and knees, watching her blood drip onto the thirsty earth. It seemed fitting somehow. The West was drinking her dry, just like it had drunk dry so many others who came seeking fortune or redemption or simply a place to belong. Get up, she told herself. Get up or die here, but her body would not obey. Her arms were shaking too badly to support her weight. The sun was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, crushing her into the dirt. She rolled onto her side and curled into a ball, clutching her carpet bag to her chest. The buzzards were closer now. She could hear the wind whistling through their feathers as they descended in lazy spirals. This was not how she had imagined it would end. She had always pictured herself dying in bed as an old woman, surrounded by children and grandchildren, slipping peacefully into whatever came next. Not alone on the Colorado plains at 22, unmourned and unremembered, her bones picked clean by scavengers. The despair that washed over her then was worse than the thirst, worse than the pain. It was the soul-crushing realization that she was utterly alone in the universe, that no one was coming, that she would die here and it would not matter because there was no one left to care. The last fragile threads of hope that had been holding her together finally snapped, and she closed her eyes and waited for the end. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, her dying brain conjuring comfort where none existed. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by the creak of leather and the jingle of spurs. She forced her eyes open and saw him, a figure on horseback silhouetted against the burning sky. The rider approached at a careful trot, and as he drew closer, details emerged from the shimmering heat haze. He sat tall in the saddle on a big sorrel gelding, wearing dusty brown trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a black hat tilted against the sun. A rifle rested in a scabbard at his knee, and a coiled rope hung from his saddle horn. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His jaw was shadowed with several days of beard growth. He reined in beside her and dismounted in one fluid motion, dropping to one knee in the dirt. His eyes, she noticed, were a remarkable gray-green color like winter sage, and they were filled with concern as they swept over her. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are hurt." Penelope tried to speak, but her swollen tongue would not cooperate. She made a small, desperate sound instead. Understanding flashed across his face. He reached for a canteen hanging from his saddle and uncapped it, slipping one arm beneath her shoulders to lift her slightly. "Slow sips," he instructed. "Not too much at once or you will be sick." The water was the most glorious thing she had ever tasted. It was warm and had a metallic tang from the canteen, but it was life itself flowing down her parched throat. She wanted to gulp it down, drain the entire container, but he pulled it away after a few swallows. "More in a minute," he promised. "Let that settle first." He studied her face, then looked around at the wagon wreckage in the distance, the dead horse, the scattered debris. "Bandits?" he asked. She managed a nod. His expression darkened. "The Fletcher gang has been working this territory for weeks. You are lucky they left you alive." "Lucky," she croaked, her voice barely audible. Something shifted in his eyes, a recognition of the bitter irony in her tone. "You are alive," he said firmly. "That counts for something." "Does it?" The words came out as a whisper, but they carried all the weight of her despair. He was quiet for a moment, then offered her more water. This time she took 3 swallows before he pulled the canteen away. "My name is Zachary Vaughn," he said. "I have a ranch about 8 miles northwest of here. Can you ride?" "I do not know," Penelope admitted. "I have never tried." "Then you will ride with me, and we will take it slow." He said it as simple fact as if her agreement was assumed. As if she still had choices. "What is your name, Penelope Crawford?" "Well, Miss Crawford, I am going to help you onto my horse now. This will likely hurt, but it cannot be helped." He was right about the pain. When he lifted her, every muscle screamed in protest, and black spots danced across her vision. But he was gentle despite his strength, settling her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. One arm came around her waist, holding her steady against his chest, while his other hand gathered the reins. "You are not alone anymore," Zachary said quietly, close to her ear. "I promise." The words broke something inside her, something she had been holding tightly closed since her mother died. Tears spilled down her cheeks, making tracks through the dirt and sunburn. She could not remember the last time she had cried, but now she could not seem to stop. Zachary did not comment on her tears. He simply held her securely and urged his horse into an easy walk, heading northwest across the rolling prairie. The gelding's gait was smooth, and after a few minutes, Penelope found herself relaxing against the solid warmth of the man behind her. She was so tired, so very, very tired. "Stay awake if you can," Zachary murmured. "Talk to me. Tell me about St. Louis." So she did, in fragments and half-finished sentences, her voice growing steadier as they rode. She told him about her father's print shop, about her mother's rose garden, about the fever that had swept through the city that spring, killing hundreds. She told him about selling everything to pay the debts, about the aunt in Denver she barely remembered, about the bandits and the terrified horses and the wagon wheel that finally gave way. He listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of acknowledgement. In turn, he told her about his ranch, a modest spread with about 200 head of cattle and a few good horses. He had homesteaded the land 3 years ago, building the house and barn himself, working from dawn to dark to carve out a life from the unforgiving Colorado soil. "It is hard work," he admitted, "but it is mine. No one can take it from me as long as I work it and pay the fees." "Do you live alone?" Penelope asked. "I have a hired hand, Miguel, who helps with the cattle. He has a wife, Rosa, who keeps house and cooks. They have a daughter, little Maria, who is 4 years old and full of mischief." There was warmth in his voice when he spoke of them. "They are good people. You will be safe there." Safe. The word seemed foreign, a concept from another lifetime. But the way Zachary said it, with such quiet conviction, made her want to believe. The ride took over 2 hours. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose when buildings finally appeared in the distance. The ranch house was modest but well built, constructed of hewn logs with a wide covered porch. A barn stood nearby, along with a smaller cabin and several corrals. Cattle dotted the surrounding grassland, and she could hear chickens clucking somewhere out of sight. A woman emerged from the house as they rode into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 30, with warm brown skin and black hair pulled back in a thick braid. Her eyes widened when she saw Penelope's condition. "Dios mío," she breathed, hurrying forward. "What has happened?" "Bandits hit a caravan," Zachary said, dismounting and then reaching up to carefully lift Penelope down. Her legs buckled immediately, and he caught her, sweeping her up into his arms. "She has been in the sun for hours with no water. Can you prepare a room, Rosa?" "Of course, of course." Rosa was already moving toward the house, calling instructions in rapid Spanish. Zachary followed, carrying Penelope as if she weighed nothing at all. The interior of the house was dim and blissfully cool after the brutal heat outside. Rosa led them to a small bedroom that was simply furnished but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt. Zachary laid Penelope down gently, then stepped back. "Rosa will take care of you," he said. "I will send Miguel into Golden to fetch the doctor." "Golden," Penelope repeated. The nearest town, about 12 miles east. Dr. Henderson makes rounds to the outlying ranches. He paused in the doorway, his gray-green eyes serious. You are safe here, Miss Crawford. Rest now. Then he was gone, and Rosa was bustling around the room, bringing water and clean cloths. She helped Penelope out of her filthy dress and undergarments, clucking her tongue at the sunburn and blisters. The cool cloths felt like heaven against Penelope's inflamed skin. Rosa brought a nightgown, soft from many washings, and helped her into it. You sleep now, Rosa said in heavily accented English, her voice kind. I bring soup later, something light for your stomach. You are very lucky Senor Vaughn found you. He is a good man, very good. Penelope wanted to respond, but exhaustion was pulling her down into darkness. The bed was soft, softer than anything she had felt in days, and the room was cool and quiet. She was asleep before Rosa finished tucking the quilt around her. She woke sometime in the night, disoriented and confused. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, panic rising in her throat until memory returned. The ranch. Zachary Vaughn, safety. A lamp burned low on the bedside table, and by its light she could see a figure sitting in a chair near the door. Zachary. He had removed his hat and his dark hair fell across his forehead. His eyes were closed, arms crossed over his chest, but he came alert the moment she stirred. Miss Crawford, he said quietly, rising. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle, she admitted, her voice hoarse. A smile flickered across his face, there and gone. The doctor came while you slept. He said you will recover fully, but you need rest and fluids. Rosa left soup and more water. He gestured to the table beside the bed. Why are you here? Penelope asked. In my room, I mean. You were crying out in your sleep. Nightmares, I think. Rosa has to care for Maria, so I said I would sit with you for a while. He seemed slightly uncomfortable, as if worried he had overstepped. I can leave if you prefer. No, she said quickly. Please, I would rather not be alone. He nodded and returned to his chair. Penelope carefully pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing at the protest from every muscle. Zachary was immediately on his feet again, adjusting the pillows behind her back. His hands were gentle, calloused from hard work but surprisingly careful. Thank you, she said, for everything. You saved my life today. Anyone would have done the same. No, Penelope said firmly. Not anyone. Many people would have ridden past, not wanting to get involved. You stopped. You helped. You brought me here. She met his eyes. Why? Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. My parents died when I was 15, he finally said. Cholera during the crossing from Missouri. We were with a wagon train heading to California, but they never made it past Kansas. The other families, they just kept moving. No one wanted to take in another mouth to feed, especially not one old enough to work but young enough to need looking after. I spent 2 years on my own, doing whatever jobs I could find, sleeping in barns and alleys. It was a hard time. He paused, his gaze distant. Then I met a rancher named Thomas Blackwell who gave me a chance. He taught me about cattle and horses, about how to read the land and the weather. He treated me like family, and when he died, he left me enough money to file my own homestead claim. He saved my life, Miss Crawford, just by seeing me when everyone else looked away. I suppose I could not ride past you for the same reason. I know what it is to be alone and desperate. Penelope felt her throat tighten with emotion. I am sorry about your parents. And I am grateful for your kindness. Eat some soup, Zachary said, deflecting her gratitude with practical concern. You need your strength. The soup was a simple chicken broth with vegetables, but it tasted better than anything she could remember. Zachary sat in his chair and watched her eat, and the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. When she finished, he took the bowl and set it aside, then offered her more water. The doctor said you should stay here until you are fully recovered, Zachary said. A week, perhaps 2. Rosa is happy to have another woman around. She complains I do not talk enough and Miguel only wants to discuss cattle. That brief smile flickered again. You mentioned an aunt in Denver. Yes, my mother's sister. But I have not seen her since I was a child, and I only have one letter she sent years ago. I do not even know if she still lives there, or if she would welcome me. Denver is only a few days' ride north. When you are well, I can take you there, help you find her. I have no money to pay you for your trouble, Penelope said quietly. The bandits took everything. I am not asking for payment. You need help and I can provide it. That is enough. She studied his face in the lamplight, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and promised she was not alone. He had a strong face, she thought, with a straight nose and firm jaw. There were fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, and his hands bore the scars of hard physical labor. He looked like someone who understood suffering and had chosen kindness anyway. I do not know how to repay such generosity, she said softly. Then do not worry about it. Just rest and heal. He stood, reaching for the lamp. I will leave you to sleep. If you need anything, Rosa and Miguel are just across the hall in the main room and I am in the loft above the barn. Zachary, she said as he reached the door. He turned back and she saw something flicker in his eyes when she used his given name. Thank you. For the promise you made out there on the plains, that I was not alone. I needed to hear that. It was not just words, Miss Crawford, I meant it. Then he was gone, and Penelope was left alone with the lamp burning low and the sound of crickets chirping outside her window. She lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes, but sleep did not come immediately. Instead, she found herself thinking about gray-green eyes and gentle hands, about a man who had known loneliness and chosen to ease it for a stranger. The next few days passed in a haze of healing. Penelope spent most of her time in bed, sleeping deeply and dreamlessly while her body recovered from its ordeal. Rosa brought meals and changed her bandages, chattering cheerfully in a mixture of English and Spanish. Little Maria would peek around the doorframe with huge dark eyes, curious about the stranger in their house. By the 4th day, Penelope felt strong enough to sit on the porch for a few hours. Rosa brought her a chair and a blanket, fussing over her like a mother hen. The view from the porch was spectacular, rolling grassland stretching toward the mountains, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. She could see Zachary and Miguel working with horses in one of the corrals, their voices carrying faintly on the breeze. Zachary had been scarce since that first night. She saw him at meals, but he seemed to find reasons to be busy elsewhere, always working, always moving. She wondered if he was uncomfortable having her here, disrupting his routine. Or perhaps he simply had work to do, and she was reading too much into his absence. On the 5th day, Rosa declared her well enough to help with simple tasks around the house. Penelope was grateful for something to do besides lie in bed. She helped Rosa with the washing, hanging clothes on the line to dry in the hot sun, and spent time playing with Maria, who was teaching her Spanish words with the enthusiastic authority of a 4-year-old. That evening, Zachary came to the house for supper and lingered afterward, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee while Miguel played guitar and Rosa sang soft Spanish songs. Maria fell asleep in her mother's lap, and Penelope found herself sitting beside Zachary on the porch steps, watching the sun sink behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and purple. "You are recovering well," Zachary observed, his voice low so as not to disturb the music. "Thanks to you and Rosa, I owe you all so much. You have been helping Rosa with the housework. She is pleased to have the assistance and the company. Miguel and I are poor conversationalists, I am afraid," Penelope smiled. She has been very kind to me, you all have. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Miguel's guitar. Finally, Zachary said, I have been thinking about your situation, about your aunt in Denver. What about her? Even if we find her, and even if she is willing to take you in, what then? Will you be happy there, dependent on her charity, living as an unwanted burden? The words stung because they echoed her own fears. I do not have many choices, she said quietly. I have no money, no family besides her, no skills that would allow me to support myself. What else can I do? You could stay here. Penelope turned to look at him, startled. In the fading light, his expression was serious, almost earnest. Stay here, she repeated. As what? As my wife. The words hung in the air between them. Penelope stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. I do not understand. Zachary set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. It is not a romantic proposal, he said bluntly. I know we barely know each other, but hear me out. This ranch needs a woman's touch. Rosa does what she can, but she has Maria to care for and she helps Miguel with the livestock. The house is barely furnished, the garden is non-existent, and I have no time for the 100 small things that turn a place into a proper home. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You need security and a place to belong. I need a partner to help run this ranch and make it into something better. It would be a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience. Separate bedrooms, no expectations beyond cooperation and mutual respect. You would have a home and a name, legal protection and a future. I would have helped building something lasting here. Penelope's mind was racing. It was absurd, insane. They had known each other less than a week. And yet, the longer she thought about it, the more sense it made in a strange, practical way. What were her other options? Throw herself on the mercy of an aunt who might not even remember her. Try to find work in Denver with no skills and no references. She had seen what happened to women alone in cities, the desperate measures they were forced to take. You barely know me, she said. How do you know I would not make a terrible wife? I might be lazy or cruel or dishonest. You have been here 5 days, Zachary replied. Rosa tells me you have been helping with chores as soon as you were able, despite still recovering. Maria adores you and speaks of nothing else. You are polite and considerate, and you have not once complained about your circumstances, even though you have every right to feel sorry for yourself. Those things tell me what kind of person you are. But marriage, Penelope protested weakly. It is such a permanent thing. It is. I will not lie to you and say it would be easy to dissolve if we found ourselves incompatible. But I am not proposing we fall into each other's arms and pretend at romance. I am suggesting a partnership built on honesty and practical need. We work together to build this ranch into something prosperous. We treat each other with respect. If over time affection grows, well, that would be a welcome development, but it would not be required or expected. He met her eyes steadily. I will not pressure you for an answer tonight. Think about it. Take your time. But know that the offer is genuine, and I would consider myself fortunate to have you as my wife, even in such an unconventional arrangement. Penelope's heart was pounding. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Part of her wanted to cry. And a small, growing part of her wanted to say yes, to grab onto this unexpected lifeline with both hands and never let go. I will think about it, she whispered. Zachary nodded and rose to his feet. That is all I ask. Good night, Miss Crawford. Penelope, she said impulsively. If we are discussing marriage, you should call me Penelope. Something warm flickered in his eyes. Good night, Penelope. She watched him walk back toward the barn, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the darkness. Behind her, Rosa's singing had stopped, and when Penelope turned, she found the older woman watching her with knowing eyes. "He is a good man," Rosa said softly in Spanish, though Penelope was beginning to understand more of the language each day. "Lonely, but good. He would be kind to you." "You heard?" Penelope asked. "The walls are thin, and you were not whispering." Rosa shifted Maria in her arms. "In my country, many marriages are arranged for practical reasons. Love comes later if you are lucky. Sometimes practical is better than passion. Passion burns hot and fast. Partnership lasts. But what if I am making a terrible mistake? What if you are missing a great opportunity?" Rosa countered. "Life gives us few chances, especially for women. When a good chance comes, we must be brave enough to take it." That night, Penelope lay awake for hours, turning Zachary's proposal over in her mind. It was mad, completely mad. And yet, was it really any more mad than traveling across the country to beg help from a relative who might not want her? Was it more mad than trying to survive alone in a world that was hostile to unattached women? She thought about the ranch, about the beauty of the mountains and the endless sky. She thought about Rosa's kindness and Maria's laughter. She thought about Zachary with his quiet strength and his understanding of what it meant to be alone. He had saved her life, and now he was offering her a future. By morning, she had made her decision. She found him in the barn, brushing down his sorrel gelding. He looked up when she entered, and she saw hope and apprehension war in his expression. "I have thought about your offer," Penelope said without preamble. Zachary set down the brush and faced her, waiting. "I accept." She saw him release a breath he had been holding. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be about anything. You are right that it is a practical solution for both of us. And I believe you are a good man, Zachary Vaughn. I believe we could build a good life together, even if it starts as a partnership rather than a romance." "Then we should do it properly," Zachary said. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through Golden once a month. He is due in town next week. We can be married then, legally and in the eyes of God. In the meantime, you continue to stay here as a guest and everything remains proper." "Agreed." He crossed the space between them and offered his hand. Penelope took it, feeling the rough calluses against her palm, the strength in his grip. "Partners, then," he said. "Partners," she agreed. The next week passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Penelope could not quite believe what she had agreed to, yet she found herself oddly at peace with the decision. Rosa was delighted and immediately began planning a small celebration after the ceremony. Miguel congratulated Zachary with a knowing grin and a string of rapid Spanish that made Zachary shake his head. They rode into Golden 3 days before the preacher was due to arrive. The town was small but bustling, a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings. There was a general store, a saloon, a bank, a hotel, and a church at the far end of the street. Zachary helped Penelope down from the wagon and then escorted her to the general store. "You will need a new dress," he said. "And whatever else you require, I have an account here." The storekeeper, a round-faced man named Mr. Peterson, greeted Zachary warmly and looked at Penelope with undisguised curiosity. Word of their impending marriage had clearly spread, because Mr. Peterson's wife emerged from the back room and immediately began fussing over Penelope, pulling out bolts of fabric and suggesting patterns. In the end, Penelope chose a simple dress in deep blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It would need to be altered, but Mrs. Peterson assured her it could be ready in 2 days. They also purchased undergarments, a new pair of boots, a hairbrush, and several other necessities. Zachary paid without comment, though Penelope felt guilty at the expense. "You are to be my wife," he said when she tried to protest. "You need proper clothing. Do not worry about the cost." They ate lunch at the hotel dining room, and Penelope was aware of the stares and whispers from other patrons. She supposed they made an odd couple, the rancher and the bedraggled stranger he was marrying after less than 2 weeks. But Zachary seemed unbothered by the attention, calmly eating his steak and asking about her preferences for household items they might need. "I am not much of a cook," Penelope admitted. "My mother tried to teach me, but I was never very skilled. I can manage simple meals, but nothing fancy." "Rosa is teaching you, yes. And honestly, after years of my own cooking, anything will be an improvement. I once burned water." Penelope laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "How does one burn water?" "By forgetting the pot on the stove until all the water boils away and the pot itself starts smoking." He looked sheepish. "Miguel found me trying to scrape the charred remains off the bottom. He has never let me forget it." It was the most casual conversation they had shared, and Penelope found herself relaxing. Perhaps this strange arrangement would work after all. They were both practical people who understood hardship. That was a foundation of sorts. The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon in the small church at the end of Golden's Main Street. The preacher, Reverend Mitchell, was an elderly man with kind eyes and a booming voice that seemed too large for his frail frame. Rosa and Miguel stood as witnesses, with Maria clutching her mother's skirt and staring at Penelope with wide eyes. Penelope wore her new blue dress, and Rosa had helped her pin up her hair and even produced a small bouquet of wildflowers. Zachary wore a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair neatly combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. When he took her hand, his grip was steady and warm. The ceremony was brief and traditional. Penelope spoke her vows in a clear voice, promising to honor and cherish, for better or worse, in sickness and health. Zachary's voice was deeper but equally steady as he made the same promises. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Penelope's cheek, a gesture that was proper and distant but somehow still made her heart skip. They signed the marriage certificate, and just like that, Penelope Crawford became Penelope Vaughn. She had a new name, a new home, and a new future stretching out before her like the endless Colorado plains. Rosa had prepared a special dinner at the ranch, and they celebrated with roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a cake that Maria had helped decorate. Miguel played his guitar, and even Zachary sang along to a few songs, his voice a pleasant baritone. Penelope found herself smiling more than she had in months, caught up in the simple joy of the moment. That night, Zachary showed her to the main bedroom, carrying her small carpet bag. "This is your room now," he said, setting the bag on the chest at the foot of the bed. "I will continue sleeping in the barn loft. The door has a lock if that makes you more comfortable. Zachary, this is your house. I cannot take your bedroom. You are my wife. Even in a marriage of convenience, I will not have you sleeping in a guest room while I take the master bedroom. Please, Penelope, allow me this." She could see there would be no arguing with him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for the dress and the ceremony and your kindness. I know this arrangement benefits us both, but you have been nothing but generous since the moment you found me." "I gave you my word that you were not alone," Zachary said. "I intend to keep that promise in every way that matters." He bid her good night and left, and Penelope was alone in her new room in her new home with her new name. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the simple gold band on her left hand, the ring Zachary had produced during the ceremony. She wondered where he had gotten it, if it had belonged to his mother, or if he had purchased it in town. She wondered what her parents would think of this rushed, practical marriage to a man she barely knew. She thought they would understand, given the circumstances. They had always been practical people themselves, her father especially. Survival first, sentiment second. That had been his philosophy. Penelope changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep was elusive. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and leather, masculine scents that reminded her she was in Zachary's space now. She thought about him sleeping in the barn loft when he should be in this comfortable bed. She thought about the strange liminal space they occupied, married but not truly joined, partners but not yet friends. Time, she told herself. These things take time. The following days fell into a routine. Penelope woke early and helped Rosa with breakfast, learning to make biscuits and fry bacon over the wood stove. After the men ate and headed out to work the cattle, she and Rosa would tackle the household chores, washing and mending and cleaning. In the afternoons, Penelope worked in the garden, coaxing vegetables from the Colorado soil while Maria played nearby. Zachary was often gone from dawn to dusk, working the range with Miguel, mending fences and checking on cattle. But in the evenings, he would return to the house for supper, and afterward he took to sitting with Penelope on the porch while Rosa put Maria to bed. They would talk about small things, the weather and the cattle and plans for improving the ranch. Slowly, carefully, they were building a friendship. 3 weeks into their marriage, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing thunder and lightning and sheets of rain that turned the yard to mud. The men came running from the barn, and everyone crowded into the house, watching the storm through the windows. Maria was frightened by the thunder, and Penelope found herself holding the little girl, singing a lullaby her mother had once sung to her. When she looked up, she found Zachary watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and wondering and almost tender. Their eyes met across the room, and Penelope felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter like wings. Oh, she thought. Oh no, she was starting to have feelings for him. Real feelings beyond partnership and gratitude. She was starting to care for this quiet, kind man who had saved her life and given her a home, who worked himself to exhaustion but always had a gentle word for Maria, who sat with her in the evenings and told her stories about his parents and his years on his own, who treated her with unfailing respect and courtesy, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. It was dangerous, she knew. He had been clear that this was a practical arrangement. He was not looking for romance. If she let herself fall for him, she would be setting herself up for heartbreak. Better to guard her heart, to keep things friendly but distant. But the heart, Penelope was discovering, did not always listen to logic. Summer deepened into August, hot and dry. The work on the ranch was constant and demanding. One of the cows had difficulty birthing, and Penelope found herself holding a lantern in the barn while Zachary and Miguel worked to save both mother and calf. It was a long, tense night, but by dawn, both were alive, and Penelope felt a surge of triumph entirely out of proportion to her small role. "You did well," Zachary told her as they walked back to the house through the gray pre-dawn light. "You stayed calm and did exactly what was needed. Thank you." "I barely did anything," Penelope protested. "You were there. That is more than you know." Something in his voice made her look at him, and she saw exhaustion in his face, but also something else. Gratitude, yes, but also a warmth that made her breath catch. Before she could analyze it, he had looked away, and the moment passed. Rosa cornered her later that day while they were canning vegetables from the garden. "You love him," the older woman said without preamble. Penelope nearly dropped the jar she was holding. "What? Senor Vaughn, you love him." "I see it in how you look at him, how you smile when he comes in for supper." "I do not," Penelope said, but the denial sounded weak even to her own ears. "It is nothing to be ashamed of. He is your husband. It is good that you love him." He does not want my love, Penelope said quietly. We agreed this was a practical arrangement. He needs a partner for the ranch, not a wife who makes demands on his emotions. Rosa made a dismissive sound. Men are fools about their own hearts. He watches you when you are not looking. He asks me if you are happy, if you need anything. He works himself to exhaustion because he wants to provide well for you. These are not the actions of a man who feels nothing. Or they are the actions of a good man honoring an agreement, Penelope countered. I will not assume more than is there. I will not burden him with feelings he does not share. Stubborn, Rosa muttered. You are both stubborn. But Penelope held firm, keeping her growing feelings locked away, hidden behind friendly conversation and practical cooperation. If Zachary noticed any change in her, he did not comment. The summer rolled on, hot days bleeding into warm nights, the ranch thriving under their combined efforts. In early September, a cattle buyer came through, offering good prices for beef to supply the mining camps in the mountains. Zachary sold 20 head, and the money would see them comfortably through the winter with some left over for improvements. He was in high spirits at supper that night, talking about building a proper chicken coop and maybe acquiring a few pigs. We should celebrate, Rosa declared. There is a dance in Golden next Saturday. You should take Penelope. A dance? Zachary looked uncertain. I am not much of a dancer. Neither am I, Penelope admitted, but it might be nice to see the town, to meet some of our neighbors properly. If you wish to go, we will go, Zachary said. The following Saturday, they dressed in their best clothes and rode into Golden in the wagon. The dance was being held in the church hall, and already the sound of fiddle music and laughter spilled into the street. Inside, lanterns hung from the rafters, and people milled about talking and laughing. Penelope recognized a few faces from their wedding day and from trips to the general store. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson approached immediately, welcoming them warmly. Mrs. Peterson introduced Penelope to several other ranch wives, women who asked friendly questions about where she had come from and how she was settling into life on the ranch. Penelope found herself relaxing, enjoying the company and the festive atmosphere. When the dancing began, Zachary offered his hand with an almost shy expression. I warned you I am not good at this, he said. Then we will stumble through it together, Penelope replied, smiling. He was actually better than he claimed, his movements sure and steady as he guided her through a simple waltz. Penelope was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the warmth of him close beside her. Her heart was beating too fast, and she knew it had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. When the waltz ended and a livelier tune began, Zachary led her outside for some air. They stood in the cool evening breeze, looking up at the stars scattered across the black Colorado sky. Thank you for bringing me, Penelope said. This was wonderful. Thank you for agreeing to come. I know this life is not what you imagined for yourself. No, Penelope agreed, but perhaps it is better. I had no life at all when you found me, Zachary. I was dying on the plains with nothing and no one. You gave me a future, a home, purpose. That is more than I dared dream. You have given me as much, Zachary said quietly. More, perhaps. The house is a home now with your touches in every room. The garden flourishes under your care, and I look forward to coming in at the end of the day because I know you will be there. Penelope's breath caught. Zachary. I know we agreed this would be practical, nothing more. But I find myself wanting to tell you that you have become important to me, Penelope, more than a partner, more than a friend. He turned to face her, and in the lamplight spilling from the hall windows, she could see the emotion in his eyes. I am falling in love with you. I do not expect you to return the feeling, and I will never pressure you, but I wanted you to know. Joy surged through her, so intense it was almost painful. "You foolish man," she said, half laughing, half crying. "I have been in love with you for weeks. I was afraid to say anything because I thought you wanted only a practical arrangement." "Then we are both fools," Zachary said, and he was smiling, a true, open smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Penelope, may I kiss you? Properly, I mean, not like that chaste peck at our wedding." "Please," she whispered. He cupped her face in his hands, calloused thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was sweet and searching and full of promise. Penelope melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, returning the kiss with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he said. "Come home and let me love you the way a husband should love his wife." "Yes," Penelope said simply. They made their excuses to the Petersons and headed back to the ranch, the wagon rattling through the night. Zachary drove with one hand, the other clasped around Penelope's, unwilling to let her go even for a moment. When they arrived home, he helped her down from the wagon and then lifted her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold as he should have done on their wedding night. Rosa and Miguel were in their cabin, and the house was empty. Zachary carried Penelope to the bedroom, their bedroom now, and set her down gently on the bed. He lit the lamp with shaking hands, then turned to her. "I have thought about this," he admitted. "About you, about us together, but I want you to be certain, Penelope, we can wait if you need more time." "I am certain," she said, standing and going to him. "I am your wife-in-law, but not yet in truth. I want to be your wife in every sense, Zachary. I want to belong to you and you to me." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress. Penelope's fingers worked at his shirt buttons, and soon they were a tangle of hands and fabric and breathless laughter as they helped each other undress. When they finally came together in the bed they would now share, it was tender and a little awkward, but also right in a way that made Penelope's heart swell. Afterward they lay tangled in each other, Zachary's arm around her waist, Penelope's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," Zachary murmured into her hair. "I will spend every day of my life trying to deserve you." "You already do," Penelope whispered back. "You saved me, Zachary, not just from dying on the plains, but from despair, from believing I had no future. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he corrected. "This ranch, this life, it means nothing without you in it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Penelope woke in the morning to sunlight streaming through the window and Zachary's arms still holding her close, she felt a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. The ranch thrived over the following years. Zachary and Penelope worked side by side, building their home and their life together. They added a room onto the house, expanded the herd, and bought better breeding stock. Penelope's garden became famous in the area, and she started selling vegetables and preserves in Golden, adding to their income. Rosa and Miguel became like family, and when their second daughter was born, they asked Penelope and Zachary to be godparents. Little Maria appointed herself Penelope's constant companion, following her everywhere and chattering in a mixture of English and Spanish. 2 years after their wedding, Penelope discovered she was with child. Zachary's joy was almost comical in its intensity, and he immediately became ridiculously overprotective, insisting she rest constantly and refusing to let her do any heavy work. Penelope found it both touching and exasperating. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she told him. "I am not made of glass." "You are carrying our child," he countered. "You are precious beyond measure, and I will not risk either of you." Their son was born in the spring of 1879, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Thomas, after the rancher who had saved Zachary all those years ago. Zachary held his son with trembling hands and tears streaming down his face, and Penelope fell in love with him all over again. Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Rose, and 2 years after that by another son they called James. The house that had once been a bachelor's sparse dwelling became filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Penelope taught them to read using her mother's Bible, and Zachary taught them to ride and work the cattle. The ranch prospered. They acquired more land, built a new barn, and hired 2 more hands to help with the growing herd. Zachary became known as a fair employer and an honest dealer, and the Vaughn Ranch developed a reputation as one of the most well-run operations in the territory. Through it all, through the hard work and the occasional setbacks, through the joys and sorrows that make up a life, Penelope and Zachary remained devoted to each other. They had started as strangers making a practical arrangement, but they had built something far more valuable, a true partnership rooted in love and respect. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and they sat together on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Penelope would think back to that desperate day on the plains when she had lost all hope. She would think about the cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and promised she was not alone. He had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have imagined. He had given her not just survival but a life worth living, not just a home but a family, not just security but love beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary would ask, seeing the soft expression on her face. "About how lucky I am," she would reply. "About how one moment of kindness changed everything." "It changed everything for me too," he would say, taking her hand. "I was just existing before you came into my life. You taught me how to truly live." And Penelope would lean into his shoulder, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Years continued to pass, bringing change and growth. Thomas grew tall and serious like his father, taking naturally to ranch work. Rose was spirited and clever, with a gift for handling horses that impressed even the experienced hands. James was the dreamer, often found with his nose in a book, and Penelope encouraged his studies, knowing the world was changing and education would be important. In 1885, Colorado had been a state for nearly a decade, and the wild frontier was slowly becoming more civilized. Golden had grown into a proper town with a railroad spur, more businesses, and even a small school. But the Vaughn Ranch remained a constant, a place of hard work and family values, anchored by the love between 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. When Penelope turned 40, Zachary surprised her with a gift he had been secretly working on for months. He led her outside to find a beautiful wooden bench placed in the garden, carved with intricate patterns of flowers and vines. On the back, he had carved their names and the date he found her on the plains, along with the words, "You were never alone." Penelope wept as she traced the letters with her fingers. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "You made this garden from nothing," Zachary said. "You made our home from nothing. You made me from nothing. I wanted you to have a place to sit and remember where we started and how far we have come." They sat together on the bench, Zachary's arm around Penelope's shoulders, and watched their children playing in the yard. Thomas was teaching Rose how to throw a rope, while James sat nearby reading and occasionally offering commentary. Rosa was hanging laundry with her daughters helping, and Miguel was repairing a fence with one of the other hands. "This is what I see when I close my eyes," Penelope said quietly. This moment, This perfect ordinary moment with everyone I love around me. I never imagined I could have this. Neither did I, Zachary admitted. I thought I would work this ranch alone, maybe hire help when I needed it, and grow old with nothing but cattle and land to show for my life. Then you came along and showed me what was possible. You showed me what love could build. We built it together, Penelope reminded him. Together, he agreed, kissing the top of her head. As the sun set that evening, painting the Colorado sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left St. Louis with nothing but grief and desperation. She had nearly died alone on the plains. She had married a stranger out of practical necessity, and from those desperate, unlikely beginnings, she had found everything she never knew she needed: a home, a family, a love so deep and true it had transformed both their lives. She had learned that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, that kindness can change everything, and that the strongest foundations are built on honesty, respect, and the willingness to take a chance on hope. Zachary had promised her she was not alone, and he had spent every day since proving that promise true. In return, she had given him everything she had, everything she was, and it had been enough. More than enough. It had been the beginning of something beautiful. The ranch continued to thrive for decades to come. Thomas eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, bringing new blood and fresh ideas to the operation. Rose surprised everyone by going east to study veterinary medicine, one of the first women to do so, before returning home to care for the livestock she had always loved. James became a teacher in Golden, educating the children of miners and ranchers alike. Through it all, Zachary and Penelope remained the heart of the family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered by shared struggles and sweetened by shared joys. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of laughter and music, 3 generations of the family Zachary and Penelope had created together. As the party wound down and the younger children were put to bed, Penelope and Zachary slipped away to their bench in the garden. 30 years, Penelope marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me on the plains. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Forever would not be long enough, Zachary said, his voice rough with age but still strong. I meant what I carved on this bench, Penelope. You were never alone. From the moment I saw you, you were mine to care for, and I have been yours in return. I know, Penelope said softly. I have always known. You saved my life that day, Zachary, but you did so much more than that. You gave me a reason to live. You gave me love and purpose and a family. You gave me everything. You gave me everything first, he insisted. Before you, I was just a man with land and cattle. You taught me what it meant to have a home, to be part of something bigger than myself. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had done countless times before, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing, and the sound filled Penelope's heart with contentment. This was legacy, she thought. Not just the land or the cattle or even the children, though those were all important. The true legacy was the love they had built, the example they had set, the proof that even from the darkest moments hope could bloom. That a desperate woman and a lonely man could find each other and create something beautiful that would outlast them both. You remember what you said to me that first day? Penelope asked. When I had given up all hope. I said you were not alone anymore, Zachary replied. I promised. "You kept your promise," she said. "Every single day for 30 years, you kept your promise." "It was the easiest promise I ever made," he told her. "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They sat there until the moon rose, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. And when they finally went inside, back to the house full of family and love and life, they walked hand in hand, still partners, still lovers, still the two lonely souls who had saved each other on a burning Colorado afternoon so many years ago. The story of how Zachary found Penelope became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The children grew up hearing about the desperate day on the plains, the promise made and kept, the love that grew from practical beginnings into something extraordinary. They learned that true strength sometimes looks like vulnerability, that asking for help is not weakness, and that the best things in life often come from unexpected places. Penelope and Zachary lived to see their great-grandchildren, the ranch passing eventually to Thomas and then to his children in turn. But the spirit of what they had built remained constant, a place of hard work and family values, anchored by love and commitment, a testament to what two people could create when they chose to face life together. And in the garden, beneath the spreading branches of the cottonwood trees Penelope had planted in their early years, the wooden bench remained, weathered by sun and rain but still sturdy, still bearing its carved message to anyone who stopped to read. You were never alone. It was a promise kept, a love celebrated, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, salvation can appear in the form of a cowboy on a sorrel horse, offering water and hope, and a future neither could have imagined. It was the story of Penelope and Zachary Vaughn, a Wild West love story that began with desperation and grew into something that lasted generations, proving that sometimes the best love stories start not with passion but with a simple promise. You are not alone anymore, I promise.